Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to another video. And today I thought I would talk about The Guardian's recent best 100 novels of all time list, and also maybe think about creating one of our own. So as some of you may have seen, The Guardian, which is a newspaper here in the UK, released a list a week or two ago called the 100 best novels of all time. So they asked, I think it was like 170 something authors, critics, academics, journalists to submit a list of their 10 best novels of all time, and they have put it together into this list of the 100 best books of all time. I think, like many people think, that these kinds of lists are, always to be taken with a bit of a pinch of salt. Even if you ask 170 something people, that is still the subjective opinion of 170 something people, and also there will be biases depending on who you ask. It is quite a literary and classic heavy list, and without that much genre fiction on it, partly because a lot of the people they have asked are literary fiction writers or academics and critics, and those tend to be the kinds of books that are more popular with those sorts of people. But also they have been quite transparent with the process of making the lists, which means you can see the top 10 books of everyone they asked. And I do wonder if that does mean there is a bit of performativeness in the books people have chosen, because they knew that not only they were contributing 10 books to this list, but also that people would know what 10 books they had said. So maybe that would make some people pick books they think they would be respected for choosing. Aaron Fraser, Aaron Read a Book, and Kate from Diary of a Provincial Lady have all gone through the list, talking about what they've read and their reactions to the list, and Gavin from Genre Books made a really interesting video talking about the list and the sort of biases and potential biases within it, and how these kind of lists get made, which I thought was really, really interesting. It picks apart a lot of the sort of things behind this list, which I thought were really interesting, so I definitely recommend that video. But like many bookish people, I enjoy a good list, so I thought I would go through the list today and talk about what books I've read, what books I'm interested in reading. As I said, I think these lists are to be taken with a pinch of salt. Some of these books may be great books, some of these books may not be great books, or may not be great books for me, and there will definitely be many, many, many great books that did not make this list. This is obviously a subjective list, and there are some quite surprising gaps, but I do always find these kind of lists quite useful for reminding me of books that I have been meaning to read for a long time and have forgotten to read. So I'm going to go through the list today, and then I also thought I would pull together a few statistics about the list, which I did the last time I did one of these list videos, which was on a list of best books from the Victorian period. I'll leave that link down below if you're interested, because that was really interesting. But then the other thing I thought might be fun to do, just to increase the general preamble of this video, I feel as I said, asking 170 something critics and academics and writers who are sort of considered more highbrow, I guess, for want of a better term, I feel that is going to produce a certain kind of list. And if you ask the general reading public, you would get quite a different list. And then I thought, I do have a sample here on Booktube of the reading public, admittedly probably a more really into books sample than the average person, but I thought maybe it would be fun to consult people who watch Booktube and who make Booktube videos on what their best novels would be. So I've set up a survey, a Google form, which asks you to submit your 10 best novels of all time. And if you would like to do that, then I will collate all of the lists of 10 best novels of all time together into a list of the 100 best novels of all time, according to Booktube. I thought that might be fun. And I think especially, I was so pleasantly surprised by the response to my Anthony Trollope survey, which I did a couple of months/weeks ago. I got a lot of responses to that survey, and I found the results really, really interesting. I spoke about them a bit in videos, but I also have another video coming up where I'm going to talk about them more. And that has encouraged me to possibly do more surveys and that kind of thing, because as I said, I do think there's an interesting sample of the reading public who watch these videos and who watch Booktube in general, whose opinions are really interesting, and whose opinions I would like to gather, I suppose. I thought this might be a fun exercise to do. Maybe I won't get enough people joining in to make a good list, but if I do, I thought that might make a fun video video in a month or two. So I think I'm going to leave the survey up for a month until the 1st of July, and I'll leave a link down below. Please do share it elsewhere as well. You don't have to make Booktube videos to take part. You don't even have to watch Booktube videos to take part. Just anyone who reads is very welcome to take part in the survey. And I'll pull together a different list of the 100 best novels of all time. I don't think someone's done this on Booktube before for a like top novels of all time thing. I think Shelley Swearingen did something similar for a best books of the 21st century when there was a list about that a few months ago / years ago, probably actually. But yeah, I thought this might be fun to do. So I'll leave the survey link down below, and if anyone would like to take part, that would be very, very lovely. If you could please give me the book title and the author, that would be really, really helpful. They do have to be novels or novellas. I don't know where you draw the line between a novel and a novella, so novellas are fine, but no short story collections, poetry or non-fiction. The Guardian had a list of the 100 best novels, so I will make mine a list of the 100 best novels. What best means is entirely up to you. Whether that means your favourites or the ones you think are the most perfect or whatever it might be, entirely up to you. Any novels from any point in time, from any country, from any language are very, very welcome. I think this might be fun. Anyway, I feel like this is going to be a long video, so let me go over to my computer and start going through the list of the apparently 100 best novels of all time according to The Guardian in 2026. Hello again. So here we are. I'm at my computer and I'm going to go through the list. So at number 100, we have My Ántonia by Willa Cather, which I have not read. I would be interested to read some Willa Cather. Whether this is definitely the one I want to start with, I don't know. But Willa Cather is definitely like on my radar. At number 99, we have The Go-Between, which I have read, which I think is fantastic and I would highly recommend. Whether I think it's one of the best 100 novels ever written, I don't know, but I do think it's very, very good. At number 98, we have The Road by Cormac McCarthy, which I haven't read and am vaguely interested in reading. I do quite like sort of dystopia, apocalyptic things, so maybe. At number 97, we have Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, which I have not read and would definitely like to. That's definitely sort of on my radar, one of those books I have been meaning to read for a while. Next, we have Pedro Páramo by Joan Ruffalo from 1955, which again, I haven't read. I don't even think I've heard of this one, to be honest. This sounds quite interesting. It does sound like it is possibly quite similar to Gabriel Garcia Marquez, as this book was a massive influence on 100 Years of Solitude. And I really didn't get on with 100 Years of Solitude. It wasn't my kind of thing at all. So maybe this isn't going to be my kind of thing. Next, we have The Return of the Native by Thomas Hardy, which I have read and I love very much and think is incredible. At number 94, we have The Known World by Edward P. Thomas. Not a novel that I have ever come across, but this sounds very interesting and like the kind of thing I might like to read. At number 93, we have Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino, which I haven't read and I would like to read sometime. I've read some short stories by Calvino, which I really enjoyed and thought were interesting, but I haven't ever got around to tackling one of his novels. Next, we have Sentimental Education by Gustave Flaubert, which I haven't read. I have read one book by Flaubert, Madame Bovary, which I really, really didn't like at all. So I don't think I'll be reading Sentimental Education. Next, Life and Fate by Vasily Grossman, another one I have not read. I've heard of the author, but not the novel, I would say. But this does sound like quite an interesting one. I think it's interesting. I've had a sort of skim through the list before, though I haven't gone through it book by book. And I think I have read a lot more of the books that are higher up the list with the lower numbers, I think, because those are the most popular, so they are likely to be the most famous. A novel that got 3 votes among the many critics and authors who were asked is on a different level of fame to a novel that got like however many votes number 1 got. Next, we have Jacob's Room by Virginia Woolf, which I have not read. I have read some books by Virginia Woolf, but not Jacob's Room. I find her books really interesting, but I don't 100% love her writing style. Modernism and like stream of consciousness is not so much for me. So having read 2 books by Virginia Woolf, I don't know how likely I am to read much more. Next, we have The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin, which I have read and I do think is fantastic. A really, really interesting science fiction novel looking at gender in a really complicated way. Definitely what I want to reread, actually, because it's been a long time since I've read it. Then we have Ragtime by E.L. Doctorow, not a novel that I have come across, but this sounds very up my street, actually. So maybe I will get hold of this sometime. Next we have The Line of Beauty by Alan Hollinghurst, which I have read. I studied this at university actually, and I do think it's a great novel. Really, really worth a read. Really fascinating look at 1980s Britain and the AIDS crisis and sort of class tensions and sort of complicated class dynamics. Next we have The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, which I have read and really don't think particularly highly of. I'm not a fan of Henry James. I do need to try one of his full-length novels sometime because I've only read The Turn of the Screw and some short stories, but I never seem to quite gel with his writing style. Next we have The Vegetarian by Han Kang, which I haven't read and I don't have particular desire to read. I feel like there are other Han Kang books I would be more interested in reading. It doesn't feel like it would necessarily be a book for me. Next you have The Talented Mr Ripley by Patricia Highsmith, which I haven't read but I do have on my shelves and I do hope to read soon because I have just heard fantastic things about it. Next, A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. I haven't read this. I have read some books by Hemingway and I really don't get on with his writing at all. I have read 2 books by him, both of which I really didn't like, so I don't think I'll be trying anything more by Ernest Hemingway. I just think it's a case of him not being an author for me. Next we have The End of the Affair by Graham Greene, which I haven't read. I would like to. I've read one other book by Graham Greene, The Heart of the Matter, which I thought was interesting. I didn't love, but I also wasn't put off reading more by him. So The End of the Affair, which I've always heard great things about, is definitely sort of vaguely on my radar. Next is Buddenbrooks by Thomas Mann, which I haven't read. I have read some things by Thomas Mann. I've read Death in Venice and some other short stories, I think, and I would like to read more, so maybe I will read Buddenbrooks sometime. Next we have Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which I have read and I do think is fantastic. One I would highly recommend, especially if you like sort of gothic tense novels, especially if you like Jane Eyre. I think it's quite an interesting book to look at in comparison to Jane Eyre, and yeah, very interesting novel. Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin. I haven't read. I have read 2 things by James Baldwin, The Fire Next Time, which isn't a novel, and Giovanni's Room, which is, and I definitely want to read more by James Baldwin. This is a good reminder to me to read more by James Baldwin because I loved Giovanni's Room so much. I just think James Baldwin writes fantastically. I in general would say as a reader I'm more excited about the plot and the characters and the writing, but every now and then I read a novel I'm like, oh, the sentences here, I would just read lots and lots of these kinds of sentences no matter the subject matter, and I feel like James Baldwin is one of those few authors who I had that feeling with, so I need to read more by him. Next, A House for Mr Biswas by V.S. Naipaul. I haven't read this. It rings a vague bell, but it's not one I've really come across. This sounds very interesting actually, so maybe I need to put this on my list. Next, The Rainbow by D.H. Lawrence. I haven't read this. I have read Lady Chatterley's Lover by him, which I thought was fine and very historically interesting. I actually read it for a history module at university about life between the 2 wars. And I found it very historically interesting, but I didn't love it as a novel, so I'm not hugely excited to pick up more by D.H. Lawrence, but maybe I will sometime. Next we have Dracula by Bram Stoker, which I've read and I personally don't like at all. It's not for me, one of my least favourite books. And I also don't think it's that good. I understand that it's quite interesting and important and seminal in sort of vampire books, but Carmilla is more seminal because Dracula wouldn't exist without Carmilla, and J. Sheridan Le Fanu is a much better writer than Bram Stoker. But anyway, I know a lot of people love Dracula. I studied it at school, and I think it's one of those situations where when you don't like a book and then you have to read it 5 times, you're gonna end up hating it much more. If I were to reread Dracula as an adult 15 years after I studied it at school, would I like it more? Possibly, but yeah, definitely wouldn't be in my list of the best 100 books of all time. Next, The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. I haven't read this. I have read one book by Toni Morrison, Beloved, and I do really want to read more actually, so this is again a good reminder to me to read more by Toni Morrison. Next, Nervous Conditions by Zitzi Dangaremberger, which is just fantastic, and I 100% agree is one of the 100 best novels ever written. To be honest, 74 is way too low for Nervous Conditions. I would put it in the top 10. I wouldn't say that it's one of my top 10 favourite novels of all time, because there are too many Victorian novels that would push it out the way, but if I had to make a list of the absolute best novels of all time, which I guess I will do if I'm doing my own survey, then Nervous Conditions would be on there. It is just fantastic. It is an incredible Bildungsroman about a girl growing up in Zimbabwe in the 1960s and 70s, I guess, and it's plays with the form of a Bildungsroman and interacts with a lot of like 19th century British Bildungsromans in like the most incredible way, and it's also just like so powerful as a book. And I just, yeah, what an incredible book. I must read the rest of the series because I haven't done so yet. And yeah, I highly recommend Nervous Conditions. If you haven't read it, please read it. It is just absolutely amazing. Next, Austerlitz by W.G. Siebold. I have not read this. It rings a bell, but I haven't come across it often. It sounds like an interesting novel, but yeah, not one I've come across before. Next, I'll Meet Your Friend by Charles Dickens, which is my favourite book of all time, so nice to see it on this list. I have to say, while I'm very pleased to see my favourite book of all time on a list of the best 100 novels of all time, I'm actually quite surprised to see I'll Meet Your Friend on here. I guess partly because there are lots of other Dickens books that are more famous, that are not on this list. I think there are some other Dickens later, I can't remember which ones, I will get to them in time. So it's nice to know that I'll Meet Your Friend is so sort of widely beloved and recognised. But also, I don't think it's a perfect book. Like, it is my favourite book ever, but there are books that are more perfect. I love I'll Meet Your Friend more than Nervous Conditions, but I think Nervous Conditions might be better if I were trying to be objective, which I don't think you really can be with books and reading. So I don't know. But yeah, I'm glad I'll Meet Your Friend is on the list because I love it very much. And I do think it's an incredible book and I highly recommend it. And I also think it is one of Dickens's best novels that is not as famous as some of his other great novels. Like, many more people have read Bleak House than I'll Meet Your Friend. But I'll Meet Your Friend is just as good, and is just outstanding in every way. So yeah. Next, Kindred by Octavia E. Butler, which I have read and I think is fantastic. Very pleased to see it on this list because I do think it's an incredible novel. Next is Jude the Obscure, which I have read and love very much. I know it's not for everyone, but I do think it's incredible, and it is one of my absolute favourite Thomas Hardy books, one of my absolute favourite Victorian books. I highly recommend it a lot. Next is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky, which I have read. It was a very long time ago that I read Crime and Punishment. I think I was about 16, 17 years old. I have a very distinctive memory of reading Crime and Punishment as a teenager and missing my bus stop, which is doubly impressive. One, because obviously I was enjoying Crime and Punishment so much I missed my bus stop, but also I get travel sick and very rarely read physically on buses, so that I was reading Crime and Punishment on the bus must mean I was really enjoying it. I would be interested to read some more Dostoevsky sometime actually, but I have not as yet. Next we have Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, which I haven't read. This sounds quite interesting actually. I've always had in my head that Cormac McCarthy is not an author that I will like, but I have no reasoning for that. The Man Without Qualities by Robert Musil. This is not a novel I've ever heard of. And as it is 1,000 pages in 3 unfinished volumes, I feel like it's not necessarily a novel that is going to be particularly high up my list, but tell me if I ought to read it. The Master and Margarita by Miguel Bulgakov. I haven't read this, but I would really like to actually. This again is a good reminder that I need to read The Master and Margarita. This has been vaguely on my radar for a long time, and I do think I would find it really interesting. Next is The Colour Purple by Alice Walker, which I have read, and I do think it's fantastic. It's a very powerful novel that I loved when I read a few years ago. Next, The Good Soldier by Ford Madox Ford, which I have read. I like The Good Soldier. I think it's good, but I wouldn't say it was a top 100 novels of all time. It is a really interesting novel, but I don't think for me it stood out enough. White Teeth by Zadie Smith I have read and didn't really get on with. I feel very complicatedly about Zadie Smith as an author because I read On Beauty and White Teeth and really didn't like either of them. They just weren't for me. They were just too literary for my taste, really. And I was kind of thinking I probably won't read anything more by Zadie Smith. And then a year or two ago, The Fraud was on the Walter Scott Prize long list, and I read The Fraud and loved it. Absolutely loved it. Thought it was amazing, fantastic. Really got on with it. So I don't know how I feel about Zadie Smith as an author, but White Teeth I have read and didn't love. Half of a Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie I haven't read. I have read her novel Americana, which I didn't especially love. Interesting themes, but not my kind of writing style. The Rings of Saturn by W.G. Siebold I have not read. It sounds interesting, but it sounds a bit too literary for my taste, to be honest. But, you know, tell me if I'm wrong and ought to give it a chance. Howard's End by Ian Forster I have read and love very much indeed. I think Ian Forster is an incredible novelist, and I'm very pleased to see some of his work on this list. I think Howard's End is a wonderful, powerful novel that probably does deserve its place on this list, and I would highly recommend it. Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. I'm very pleased to see it on this list. I love this book a lot. Just an incredibly powerful novel about childhood and growing up and what it means to be alive. It's just the best. Next we have Disgrace by J.M. Coetzee, which I hated. I read it a few years ago and just, yeah, one of the books I have enjoyed reading the least in my life. The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner I have not read. I've obviously heard of it, but I don't know if I am particularly excited to try it. Maybe I should try some Faulkner. I've never tried any Faulkner. Let me know if I ought to give Faulkner a try and if this is the place to begin. Next we have Mansfield Park by Jane Austen, which I have indeed read and love very much. I'm pleasantly surprised to see Mansfield Park on this list because it is many people's least favourite Jane Austen, though it is my second favourite after Pride and Prejudice, and I love Mansfield Park a lot. So very lovely to see Mansfield Park on this list. Next we have The Waves by Virginia Woolf, which I haven't read. As I said, I've read a couple of Virginia Woolf books and her writing style is not particularly my sort of favourite thing. Orlando by Virginia Woolf, I also haven't read. A lot of Virginia Woolf on this list. Orlando actually is the one Virginia Woolf book I would really like to read that I haven't read already, because I think the way it looks at gender is really interesting, so I hear. So I feel like I would quite like to read it for that element, even though I know that Virginia Woolf's writing style is not really my cup of tea. Next, The Transit of Venus by Shirley Hazard. I haven't read this one. I haven't heard of this one, I don't think, but this sounds like quite an interesting novel, although apparently Hazard is often compared to Henry James, who I don't especially get on with so far. I really enjoy that she apparently said that she thinks she's funnier than Henry James. That makes me warm towards Shelley Hazard. The Golden Bowl by Henry James, as I said, I haven't read that much Henry James and don't tend to get on very much with his books. My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante, I haven't read. I actually don't have much desire to pick up My Brilliant Friend, even though many people say how much they love it, but I've just never particularly felt drawn towards it. Let me know if I really should give it a try. Next, Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys, I have read. I do think is great. I think Jean Rhys is a really interesting writer. I actually prefer some of her other books. Leaving Mr Mackenzie, or After Mr Mackenzie, I think it's called. I read that a long time ago, but I thought that was really great. But Wide Sargasso Sea is an interesting novel, and I would highly recommend it if you're interested in Jane Eyre and books that, you know, interact with Jane Eyre in some way. A Fine Balance by Ragtime Mystery. I have not read this. I haven't come across this one, but it sounds really interesting. So I kind of feel like I should be adding that to my TBR. The Metamorphoses by Franz Kafka, I have read. I thought Metamorphoses was fine. I don't think Franz Kafka is particularly an author for me, but there we go. Next, Vanity Fair, which I have read. I haven't read this since I was a teenager. I really liked it as a teenager. I will at some point get around to rereading it and reading more by William Makepeace Thackeray. I've only read 2 of his novels and 1 novella. The Vanity Fair was very interesting. Next, The Leopards by Lampedusa. I have read this. I read it a few years ago. I didn't especially get that much out of it, and it hasn't stayed with me at all. Not necessarily my cup of tea particularly. The Golden Notebook by Doris Lessing I have read and I do really like, and I would highly recommend. I studied this at university and I think it's a really interesting novel. Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin, as I think I mentioned earlier, I've read and I love. I think is incredible. Such a fantastic novel. Baldwin is just an incredible writer. Housekeeping by Marilyn Robinson, I haven't read. I don't think I've heard of Housekeeping actually. I've heard of her series that has Home in it and Gilead. And I think there's another book in that series I've missed. But I haven't come across Housekeeping before. I have never particularly felt drawn to Marilyn Robinson's writing, but I think if I were to pick something up, it would be her series that I often hear about. The Magic Mountains by Thomas Mann, I haven't read. As I said, I have read Death in Venice by Thomas Mann, which I did really enjoy, so I would like to read more by him, but I haven't as yet. Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, I have read. I studied at university. I think is an interesting novel with a lot of historical interest, I guess, but it wouldn't appear in my, best books of all time list. Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison, I haven't read. I would like to read more Toni Morrison, as I said. I've only read 1 book by her so far. The Eyes Are Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston, I have read and I think is incredible. Would highly recommend it. Such a powerful novel about love and growing up and change. And yeah, What a great book. The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. I always get really mixed up in my mind between The House of Mirth and The Age of Innocence. I can never remember which is which. Okay, it's The House of Mirth I've read, not The Age of Innocence. So I haven't read The Age of Innocence yet. I would really like to because I loved The House of Mirth and Ethan Frome. So I definitely do need to read more by Edith Wharton. I feel like it's been quite a few years since I last read something by her. Again, I do always find these lists helpful for reminding me of those books I've been meaning to read for a while. Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison I haven't read, but I would really like to. That's definitely on my radar as a book I would like to read. So hopefully I will get to that sometime. The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood I have read. I read it a good 10 years ago. I thought it was good and interesting, but I didn't love it. I would like to read more by Margaret Atwood sometime though. Great Expectations by Charles Dickens I have read and I love, and I do think it's fantastic, and it's nice to see it on this list because it is a great book. Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel I have not read, and I really should. As someone who loves historical fiction, I feel like I very much need to read Wolf Hall sometime. And in fact, I have a hold on the Wolf Hall audiobook at the library, and I have suspended it on the Libby app for like months. But sometime I will read Wolf Hall. I think because I love historical fiction and because everyone says that Wolf Hall is like the greatest historical fiction novel ever written, there's a bit of me that feels like I might not like it, or that is a bit like intimidated by it. David Copperfield is next by Charles Dickens, which I have read and I love. Quite a lot of Dickens on this list. Surprising to see it above Great Expectations actually. But it is a great novel that I love very much. The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy I have not read. I am kind of interested in reading. The Prime of Miss Jean Bronte by Muriel Spark I have read and I do really like. I studied this at university. I think it's a really, really interesting, clever book. Next, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, which I have read and love again. I haven't read this for a long time. I read it about 10 years ago and I do really, really want to reread it. Pale Fire by Vladimir Nabokov I haven't read. I don't feel much desire to pick up Nabokov, to be honest. I don't think he sounds like he'll be an author for me. The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky I haven't read. I would like to. As I said, I've read Crime and Punishment and enjoyed it, but it was quite a long time ago. I should read more Dostoevsky. Next, The Trial by Franz Kafka I haven't read. Having read Metamorphosis, I don't feel particularly fussed about picking up more by Franz Kafka. I don't think he's really for me. Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes I haven't read. I would really like to. I've got an audiobook of this that I've been meaning to read to for a long time because I think I would find this really interesting. So hopefully I'll pick up that at some point. Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. As I've already said, I don't think I have any particular pull towards reading Nabokov, and I also don't really feel any wish to read a book with the subject matter of Lolita. Outstanding though it may be. The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro is next though, which I love very, very much, and I heartily agree is one of the best novels ever written. I think maybe it's just the best novel ever written. I mean, I think I maybe said that about Nervous Conditions earlier. The Remains of the Day would not only be in my like favourite 10 books of all time. Subjectively, I just really love it and have a great like attachment to it. But I also just think it's perfect. Like I also just think it's the perfect novel. I think it might be just the best book ever written. So yeah, read The Remains of the Day. What a great book. Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie I have read and I do think it's fantastic. I studied this at university and I think it's just, yeah, a really powerful, interesting, different, wild novel that is really worth a read. I have not read that much else by Salman Rushdie. I read The Satanic Verses and didn't get on with it at all, so I don't really know where to go with him next. But yeah, Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe I have read. Again, I studied at university. Interesting actually how many of these books I studied at university. I guess it does actually make quite a lot of sense that like the books that are, you know, held up by the establishment of like academics, critics, journalists and writers in the UK. Not everyone they asked to contribute to the list is British, but a lot of them were, I think. But it kind of makes sense that the list of books that that group would choose are also quite similar to the books like being taught at British universities or that were being taught at British universities like 10, 15 years ago. So yeah, interesting. The Portrait of a Lady by Henry James is next, which I haven't read. And it's probably the Henry James I'm most keen to read. As I said, I would like to give one of his full-length novels a try. And I think it probably would be Portrait of a Lady. And then if I don't get on with that, I will know that I'm just not going to get on with his writing. Next is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, which I have read and I love. And I definitely think is one of the best novels ever written. It's marvellous. I know it's not for everyone. Very Marmite book. But yeah, personally, I think it's just a masterpiece. The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy, Gentleman by Lawrence Stern. I have not read. I would like to read actually. I've heard very good things about it and I think it's meant to be like a fun, playful book that plays with form and like what a novel is, which I always enjoy. And I think it's one of the like older books that does that. So I am keen to read that at some point, though I haven't got around to it yet. Persuasion by Jane Austen is next, which I love and have indeed read. It's not my personal favourite Jane Austen. It would be sort of in the lower half of my Jane Austen ranking, but all of my Jane Austen ranking is, you know, super high because I love Jane Austen so much. So, you know, next 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, which I have read, and as I think I said earlier, I didn't get on with at all. I found it very, very confusing. It is very slow, and it's just not my kind of thing. Next, 1984 by George Orwell, which I have read and I do think is great and really interesting and well worth a read. Next, Moby Dick by Herman Merva, which I haven't read, and will I ever read Moby Dick? I don't know. I have complicated feelings about Moby Dick as a novel because every time I hear anyone talk about it, I think that sounds incredible and like just the kind of book I would love to read. All the themes sound fantastic. That sounds wonderful. But I have a phobia of fish. And I know whales are not technically fish. I know that whales are not biologically fish. But if you have a phobia of fish, whales are fish. Giant, terrifying fish. I don't want to read a book about a whale. I just think I would find it deeply unpleasant and it would make me hate the book. But I also feel like everything else about it, except for the whale, sounds great. So yeah, I'm just not sure I can handle all the discussion of a whale. I'm just not sure I can do it. Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf I have read, and I did really like. I think of the two books, well, the two novels and the non-fiction I've read by Virginia Woolf, Mrs. Dalloway is the one I like most. I definitely liked it more than To the Lighthouse. Next, Emma by Jane Austen, which I have read and I do love and I do think it's fantastic. Next, Bleak House by Charles Dickens, which I have read and I do love and I do think it's fantastic, and I'm very pleased to see on this list because I do think it is, yeah, one of Dickens's masterpieces. If I were to name Dickens's 3 masterpieces, I would probably say Bleak House, Great Expectations and Our Mutual Friend, though Dombey and Son, Little Dorrit are like my personal favourites more than Great Expectations. Possibly, maybe not, I don't know. But yeah, I'm very glad to see Bleak House on this list. Next, The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, which I have read quite a long time ago. I liked The Great Gatsby. It wouldn't be in my like top 100. Next, Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert, which I really, really didn't like at all. And you know, like sometimes you read a book and you're like, this is just not my thing. And sometimes you read a book and you're like, why does everyone love this? And when I read Madame Bovary, that was my feeling. I just think you should read Anna Karenina instead, is my main feeling. I really, really didn't get on with it. And I feel like I know a lot of people who really, really didn't get on with Madame Bovary either. Next, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, which I have read and I'm pleased to see in the top 10 because I love it very much. Next, Jane Eyre, which I have read and I'm pleased to see in the top 10. Yeah, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte is a fantastic novel that I highly recommend and love a lot, and one of the books that got me into Victorian literature and literature kind of as a whole, I guess, and reading more properly when I was a teenager. Next, War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy, which I have read and do think is fantastic. I really like War and Peace. I think it's a really interesting book and a very powerful one. I liked Anna Karenina more of the Tolstoy I've read, but I do think it's great. Oh, and here's Anna Karenina. I'm glad to see Anna Karenina is also on the list because I do think it's fantastic and I like it more than War and Peace. And I think it probably is a better way into Tolstoy. But I do really like both of them, and in general I like Tolstoy a lot. Next, In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust, which I haven't read and I don't know if I will. It's a 7-volume epic and it doesn't sound necessarily like it would be my kind of thing. Next, To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, which I've read and is fine. I did read it a very long time ago. Maybe I would appreciate it more if I reread it now, but I would probably recommend Mrs. Dalloway over To the Lighthouse were I to recommend some Woolf. And she, as I said, is not necessarily my cup of tea in terms of her writing style. Next, Ulysses by James Joyce, which I have not read and have no desire to read. I read Dubliners and Dubliners was fine, but I didn't really get on with it, and Ulysses, by all accounts, is very impenetrable and sort of super high literary, which is really not my cup of tea. So I don't think I'll ever be reading Ulysses. Next is Beloved by Toni Morrison, which I have read and do love very much. I do think it's an incredible novel, and I definitely want to read more by Morrison, as I said already. Beloved is an incredible book. And what do we have at number 1? It's Middlemarch by George Eliot, which I have read and think is fine. No, that's not true. That's definitely an inaccurate description of my opinions about Middlemarch. I don't get on with George Eliot's writing style. She is not an author for me. She's just not the kind of books I like to read. But I do think she is a great writer, and I do think Middlemarch is a masterpiece. It's just not It's just not my kind of masterpiece. I've read it a few times. I respect it, but I don't like it. And that's fine. But many people do love it. So it is well worth a try. George Eliot may or may not be for you. So there we go. That is the list. I've read 51 out of 100 of The Guardian's best novels, which, you know, seems respectable. But as I said, all these kinds of lists are very subjective and to be taken with a pinch of salt, so it doesn't really matter that I've read half of them. I also understand that following this list, The Guardian published like a correction, and apparently The Stranger by Albert Camus was meant to be on this list, but they miscounted it because the title is translated into English sometimes as The Stranger and sometimes as The Outsider. So that should be on this list, and I haven't read that. And I gather they also miscounted My Ántonia, and it should be higher. So I guess then the Albert Camus book would take off The Go-Between. I guess The Go-Between will be the book to lose out, which will be a shame because it's great. And then I guess I would have read 50 out of the 100, but that doesn't really matter. So it's an interesting list, I think. There's a few authors who are on it like quite a lot of times. Like there's quite a lot of Woolf on this list. And I know Virginia Woolf is a very respected author, but I'm surprised to see quite that many books by Virginia Woolf on this list. I think it's an interesting list, and there are some great books on this list and also some books on this list that I really didn't like. There are definitely some like big omissions and surprising omissions from this list. I'm very surprised, as I know a lot of people have already said, that The Lord of the Rings isn't on there. I haven't read The Lord of the Rings. I really want to read The Lord of the Rings, but it is surprising that there's no Tolkien on the list. It's also quite surprising to me that there's no Alexander Dumas or Victor Hugo, because they are both such incredible writers. And in my mind, they are like as highly considered and like as well known and still read as Tolstoy. So to have War and Peace and Anna Karenina on this list, but not The Count of Monte Cristo or Les Miserables, is a surprise to me, I suppose. It's also surprising, potentially, to have no Agatha Christie on the list, but I guess she wrote so much that you could have a lot of people mentioning Agatha Christie, but unless they all mention the same one, she's not going to end up on the list. There's also no Anthony Trollope, which, you know, I'm sad about, but not surprised about. No Elizabeth Gaskell, not hugely surprised. Well, I would have said that North and South was a more beloved book than Vanity Fair, but maybe that's more beloved by like general readers than academics who might be more likely to appreciate Vanity Fair, which is more like literary, I guess, though it's a bit anachronistic to apply that term to a 19th century book, but you know what I mean. I think what I'm going to do now is stop this video and work out some stats about the list. I'm curious to know, for example, how many countries are represented on this list, and how British skewed it is. I would expect it to be British skewed because it is a publication in a British newspaper, and because quite a lot of the people they asked to contribute were British. But I'm quite interested to see like what other countries in the world are represented and what aren't in this list. Hello again, I'm back. I have been going through the list and coming up with some statistics, which I thought might be interesting. Of the 100 books, there were 75 authors, so that means quite a lot of repeat authors, only 75 authors on the list. The most popular author was Virginia Woolf, who had 5 books. There were 2 authors with 4 books, Charles Dickens and Jane Austen. Then there were 2 authors with 3 books each, Toni Morrison and Henry James. And then there were 11 authors who had 2 titles. I think it's really interesting that Virginia Woolf had 5 books on this list. Like, I know Virginia Woolf is very respected and loved, but 5 books is a lot. And I would have expected Jane Austen or Charles Dickens to have more than Virginia Woolf. Maybe that's just a reflection on my own bias because I love Jane Austen and Charles Dickens more than Virginia Woolf. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. There are 37 books by women and 63 books by men. I feel like The Guardian said in their article that there were 36 books by women, so I don't know if I've miscounted or they miscounted. But I found it interesting in the Guardian article they were talking about you know, how many more female writers were on the list that they made this year in comparison to the lists they've done in previous years. But I still feel like 37 is like quite a long way below half. When it comes to the centuries, there was 1 book from the 17th century, 1 book from the 18th century, 26 from the 19th, and 62 from the 20th, and 10 from the 21st. Of the 62 books from the 20th century, 24 of them were from 1900 to 1950 and 38 from 1950 to 1999. I found that quite interesting, actually, that the 20th century is more representative of the 19th. I felt like it was quite a 19th century list as I was going through it, but I think that's because I had read most of the ones from the 19th century, rather than because the list is dominated by the 19th century. There's probably fewer of the 20th century ones I've read, though I had read some of them. I think it's quite interesting that it's quite a 20th century list, because I feel like some of these sort of best novels of all time lists tend to be really dominated by older books. And obviously there's actually quite a lot of sort of more modern classics on this list, which I thought was interesting. Then in terms of where the books are from, 20 of the 100 books are translated, which is not very many. I think that is a shame, but I also understand that I feel like most of the people they were asking were people who write in English, so it's not hugely surprising. Also, I don't know what criteria the people were given, but when you go on to the individual authors' like lists of their 10 favourites, some of them give their criteria. And as Gavin from Genre Books pointed out, there was at least one person who said that in their criteria they had only included books originally written in English, so that may have also skewed the list. Then in terms of the countries that the authors were from, on the list there were 43 books from British authors, 29 from US authors, 7 from Russian authors, 4 from German authors, 3 from French, Indian and Italian authors, 2 from Nigerian authors, 2 from Ireland, 2 from Czech authors. I've counted Franz Kafka as Czech, though Czechia was not its own country at the time, so I guess the country he was born in was Austria-Hungary at the time. And then there were several other countries who are represented by one author, as it were, so Spain, Trinidad and Tobago, Mexico, South Africa, South Korea, Canada, Austria, Ukraine, Zimbabwe, Australia and Colombia. That list of numbers will add up to more than 100 because some authors who have like spent half their life in one country and half their life in another country, I have counted for both. So obviously the list is British skewed, which, you know, I guess is not hugely surprising for a British newspaper, and is not so British skewed as, you know, that list from the late 19th century, which I looked at a few years ago, which I think was like 80% British or something, I can't remember. So considering it's a sort of list made in the UK, I think it's interesting that it is fewer than half the books that are British books, but obviously still very dominated by British and indeed next by American writers. So I think those were most of the statistics I wanted to go through. I did remember as I was going through the list, I thought of another like couple of books that I'm really sad not to see on the list. And one of them in particular is Passing by Nella Larsen, which I also think is one of the best things ever written. Along with like Nervous Conditions and The Remains of the Day, you know, books that I just think are perfect. Passing by Nella Larsen is one of those. So I'm sad that's not on the list. I have really enjoyed doing this. I feel like I've been filming for a really long time, so sorry if this has been a horrendously long video. But I hope you have enjoyed me going through this list and talking about some of the statistics and looking at, you know, what books are on the list and what I've read and what I'd be interested in reading. As I said, I think it would be really fun to make a Booktube's best novels of all time list. So please do take part. I will be really, really grateful. The survey is linked down below. Please tell me what you think are the 10 best novels of all time, in your opinion, ranked from 10 to 1. What best means is entirely up to you. It could be your favourite novels, it could be the novels you think are the most important or the most perfect or the best written or the ones you'd recommend to everyone. I don't mind. Do please include books from all over the world, written in any language originally from any point in time. And if you could leave the title and the author, that would be really helpful too. Partly that will just make it easier for me, but also there are some books with the same title. If a book is in translation, feel free to leave me the English language title and the original language title. That might also help me find it, especially if it's a book that is sometimes translated with different titles. And yeah, I think this will be fun. I will leave the survey open till the 1st of July. Please take part and send it to other people and spread the word, etc. Okay, that is all for now. Thank you for watching this very long video. Do let me know your thoughts down in the comments. How many of the Guardian's best novels of all time have you read? What do you think of the list? Thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.